sort of feel like we should just leave it at that. Please don't stop writing. Thank you. That was one of the kindest introductions I've received. I really appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And thank you all for coming. It's really a pleasure to be here. I was saying over dinner the last time I was here at Tree, we were in a dark, cold little basement. So you got new digs. They're really nice. And it's always lovely to read in Ottawa. So I'm going to start by reading a couple poems from the Dream World. It was published in 2008, but just before or around the time of its publication, I got pregnant and I was very sick and I had to cancel all my readings, and so I've actually read from it fairly infrequently, so it still feels a little bit like a new book to me, which is nice. One of the places that I did go to read, oh, I just realized, oh, I have the right copy. I have the right copy, but I don't have my little sticky notes in it. There we go. One of the places that I did go to read from the Dream World, I was invited to a small poetry festival in Ireland. And when you're in a new place, I didn't know anybody there, and you try to find a way to connect to the audience by finding something you have in common with them. So I told them about my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who was the father of the Humane Society in Ireland. I think they believed me. But this is actually true. Have you guys heard me tell that joke before? No. I find myself reading the same poems over and over because there's sort of certain ones that I think read better anyways. So it is true that I have an ancestor who was the father of the Humane Society, and also that I'm an extremely unlikely descendant for somebody who founded such an organization, because I'm not very good with animals. My husband and I joked when we were getting married that we were going to include in our vows that we would never have a pet. We didn't, but...
You wait until I get older.
I know already. I have a little 1-year-old who's, she's obsessed with, the first thing she said was, woof, woof. She has laser eyes, like she can, I don't see a dog anywhere, and she says, woof, woof. And I look, and sure enough, like 5 kilometers away on the horizon. Maybe she can have a fish. So, I'm going to read a poem about something bad that I did to a robin once, by accident. And just to give you a little bit of the scene, so we have a cabin, and we arrived in the springtime, and a robin had made her nest right above the door and laid her eggs in it. So it's just called Robin. She must have thought this cabin empty, which, for weeks at a time, it is, to set her cup of twig and twine like a glass of pricey wine, a golden goblet gently down in the eave above the door. It seemed enough. She plucked its warmth from Easter's closet, fashioned it from fleece and leaf, and in it laid her regal prize, out of reach of porcupines and other probing eyes. Our wheels up gravel, sad surprise. She refuses first to yield, and stays puffed up, all huff and flush, ensconced next to the welcome sign, a sulky host. But as the car is unpacked, slow, as though a complex line of thought, and as the door keeps slamming closed an inch away from her abode, some base instinct makes her leave her nest for good and save herself, makes her swoop a blazing breast over to the maple's safety. Her beady gaze stays glued on us. Human will, says Augustine, is poised between a kind of hell and good that looks like feathers' flight, the heart's sharp urge to rise and hover over nature's endless picture, yes, to love it all. Now, our trunk relieved of beer and snacks and sleeping bags, we let our digital camera help. Tippy-toed, we reach its eye above her hearth too high for sight, then bring the slim box down and crowd around its wordless snap. Selfishly, we hope to see the absence left by winter's death, her hollow nest, deep and tough, and from it, thrusting up, the root of spring returned as form. 3 blue eggs, 3 perfect globes. And in the morning, once we've risen, 3 round dreams of baby chicks, eyes closed tight and beaks agape, dashed in shells across the deck. We stand astonished, our coffee cooling, all around us sun and breeze unspooling green between the maples flip in different leaves. The robin's gone, her brood has been eaten. Though it's resurrection season, I don't wish for them to rise, but for once for words that find some meaning I can get behind. Oh yolky blot, oh yellow slick, let me stand and take their place. Be this mess that I've helped make. Be broken, spilled, forgiven. So, as I mentioned, I wrote this book before getting pregnant, but for some reason it has several poems about small children throwing food around in it. So, I think I must have been psychic. So I'm going to read 2 of those poems now. When I was a little girl, in our house we had a lunch that was called Plate of Things. And it was, my sister was a very picky eater, so it was sort of like a plate with the 3 things that she would eat, like 1 carrot stick and half of a cherry tomato and a Triscuit or something. But I always thought that it was all one word, like, what's for lunch? Plate of Things. I was maybe 13 years old when I realized it was 3 discrete words. And I also thought that the name for toast with cheddar on it was cheese on bread under the broiler. Honestly. So this is a poem sort of written for my sister that features a plate of things at the beginning. And it's just called Childhood. Triscuits, cheese cubes, fingers of celery, the cool grooves filled with peanut butter, sourdough made by my mother's hand, the starter yeasty and stored in the dark. The plate appeared at noon precisely, cleaving the day into unequal halves. An apple split, then split again, a wedge per year of life so far. School was approaching, reckoning day. I drank my milk and knew the world as child-sized bites to cram in my mouth, token bits of something bigger. Late at night, the world was lost, the way a hunger fills and empties, plate or planet, round and white. Look up and marvel. So as Rona mentioned in her introduction, I wrote, I think all of the Dream World actually while we were living in St. John's, and I did an MPhil there, but it was in humanities, so all the other students who I was studying with were studying philosophy proper, but I was allowed to write poems in response to the readings instead of academic papers, so I felt pleased with myself to have stumbled across this program, and I had funding to do it. So, however, I was not a philosopher, and all the other students were, and so for me it was like coming in on a very, centuries-long, in-depth conversation and hearing a tiny little snippet of dialogue and then being asked to give my impression. So, this is my impression of Lacan. Are there any Lacan scholars in the audience? No?
Yeah.
Yeah?
No.
Oh, good. Yeah, exactly. I understood from Lacan that the baby likes the breast, which I can attest is true. Lacan is, I found him extremely dense, almost impenetrable. Anyway, this is what I could access. So this is a poem called The Cosmos Reading Lacan. The baby is learning to eat soft foods, fruit of experience pureed by father, simplified into minuscule mouthfuls that manage still, like wayward missiles, to miss their target's mark and splatter the faces of innocent children. This one here begins to glean that evening means betrayal. Meal adjourned, bathed and changed, kissed and laid in the cell of his crib, his hunger remains. He fits his fist into its shape, fills his face with fingers. That other flesh, that milky moon, comes less often, sets too early. Mobile above, a stellar distraction, wild constellation cleaving the cosmos, the baby peers up from the crux of his cradle, mouth as wide as its absence. He searches the spheres like an early astronomer, starting to question his central position, unsure what exactly he's lost, but already desperate to find it. Okay. Rona has taken everything that I was going to use for my introductions and said it. So I'm teasing. I'm going to read the opening poem. Yeah, it was funny to hear you quote from that old New Quarterly essay. That's very old. I kept thinking, did I write that? Yeah, so this book is there are several different themes, but one of them is moving to a new place and trying to find a sense of belonging, and a second is wrestling with the shortcomings of language. So I think as a writer just starting out, I felt so enamored with language and all its possibilities and this thing that I had found, and by the time I came around to the dream world, I felt less excited and more humbled and sobered in the face of trying to make language work in the way that I wanted it to. So this is a poem sort of about that. It's called The Hinterland. I walk as far as I can, then farther, past the chain link barring the road, tire tracks deep in the rut of my thinking, the place I always get stuck. Wanting more or wanting less, to be rid of the word called wanting. Boulders, tall grass, shrubs I can't name, birds I can't name, the ocean. Being a stranger sneaks me through the latch of language, briefly. Bottles I know, condoms I know, and the weight of being human where other humans have been. The back of the sea like one line of thought, a slight variation of foam at the shore where the artifice gives itself up. Farther out, a ledge in the rock, as though attention might help. Turning for home, hands in my pockets, night mists in like animal breath, the black-brown shapes of gathering mammals bending to drink at the silent pool of mind submerged in mind. If a gap exists at all, it's there I might have slipped through. And I think I'm going to move on to the novel. I'm going to move on to the novel. We were talking over dinner how you shouldn't hesitate. So this is the book that I've mostly been touring with this fall. It's called Bartigo. It tells the story of a affluent, secular Czech Jewish family around the time of the Munich Agreement, so late 38 and early 39. It's autobiographical in terms of there's thematic resonances between the characters in my family. It's not an autobiographical novel at all in terms of plot. But that was the same time and place and circumstance that my dad's family lived in. And I realized this fall that reading fiction goes over better if you choose a piece that has some plot in it. For years I only have one other novel out, but for years I had been choosing the segment where I liked the writing the best, and the readings would just sort of fall flat, and then suddenly it occurred to me, oh, like the audience needs to care what's going to happen. But it's very hard to find a segment that's the right length and that contains everything that the reader needs to know. And anyway, all to say I've been reading the same two pieces over and over. I'm sick of them, so I'm not going to read them to you tonight. I'm going to trust that since you guys are such a great poetry audience, that I can read a bit that is less plot focused. And we'll see how it goes. It's just a little short segment. So the bulk of the story is focused on this family, and then there's an unnamed contemporary narrator whose relationship is obscure at the beginning, and it becomes clarified how she is related to the historical characters. And this is a segment in her voice. And it's so plotless that you don't need any background. She's an unhappy person, I guess, and she's alone in the world. She'd say that. At night, I walk by the river and think about everything lost. It's a cliche, sure, but for every decision that gets made, a billion other options are forsaken. This is true even of happy events. Take a wedding, one future chosen and an infinite number of others let go. Or conception, think of all the sperm, of all the people who will now never exist. I wonder if this is how my mother thought of me, if she would have preferred me to arrive at another time, or perhaps as a different child entirely. I imagine her as a woman not particularly taken with motherhood, as a woman with other things on her mind. Lisa, I tell myself, don't be so dramatic. The truth is, I'm a little prone to wallowing. After you stood me up at Schwartz's, I closed my file on you. I closed it the way I've tried to close the one on my mother, the one that nevertheless always finds its way to the top of the pile. The Freudians were wrong about so many things, but the influence of parents, that part they got right. There's a feeling that comes over me, a feeling that has nothing to do with my mother and at the same time equals perfectly her absence. If I'm walking late at night through the quiet winter streets and the smell of someone's laundry floats up from the vent in their basement, if there's a light on in a living room, a table lamp, or the TV's blue glow, if there are people moving around behind a lace curtain, their details are obscured, I pretend it might be her. The longing sharpens until I think I might pass out. I find some excuse to lean over, to tie up my bootlace. I catch my breath and straighten back up and crane my neck, trying to get a glimpse. Once, a man came to the front door, snow boots pulled on over his plaid pajama bottoms. He cleared his throat. "Can I help you?" he asked, not unkindly. I realized I'd been standing there for probably half an hour. "Oh," I said, "I'm sorry, I was just..." But I could not think of anything I might have been doing, so I turned away and kept walking. 1 step, 2 steps. Hope, unanswered over a life as long as mine, becomes more of a curse than a blessing. I don't really know what to say about my mother. I wonder who she could have been as part of my adult life. When you don't have something, it's easy to idealize that. It's easy to idealize it. I understand that. I really do. Still, I hate to hear people complain about their mothers. I always have to fight back the urge to tell them how lucky they are, which of course would make me sound like a mother myself. There's a park I sometimes pass when I'm walking late at night, the playground abandoned, ghostly. Sometimes I'll wedge myself into one of the swings and drag my heels in the sand for a while. Once I happened by the park in the middle of the afternoon, and the place was full of women and strollers. It was easy to pick out the parents from the nannies. The parents were the ones who were showing off their children, bragging about math scores and soccer goals, as though intelligence and good behavior on the part of the child make the parent herself worthwhile. The nannies had enough detachment to give the kids room to breathe. Still, though, it's the flesh and blood I wonder about. It's hard for most people to imagine what it's like to have absolutely nobody. No flesh of my flesh, no blood of my blood. For a while there was a glimmer of hope about my father, but that turned out to be a pipe dream. I go weeks, months without anyone knowing where I am, without anyone checking up on me, I mean. I know what you're thinking. I wonder, of course I do. Is there a childless woman who doesn't? But I think it's for the best. No, let me rephrase that. I'm sure it's for the best. To have a child is to open yourself up to the greatest loss. All you have to do is think for 2 seconds about the camps, about the mothers in line for selection who had their children torn from their arms, about the children themselves who were lured into trucks with the promise of chocolate, herded like baby lambs into holding pens, stripped and shorn. That's all there was to it. They were gassed to death and burned. They drifted west, a thin scrap of cloud from the mouths of the godlike chimneys. There are things I remember about my mother, the growling of her stomach late at night, her fingers combing gently through my hair, and the first notes of what? A lullaby? No, something less certain, less solid. I remember a dim street, late fall, and my mother at the end of it with a kerchief knotted under her chin. She was looking back at me already then, as though across a great gulf of time. I tried to move toward her, but the street was so long, and there were people blocking my path. When I caught another glimpse, she had taken off her scarf. It was crumpled in a ball in her hand, which she held against her chest. A bit of wind played with the hair around her face. She held my gaze. There was something she was telling me, something she needed me to know. The whole history of our family was contained in that look. Then she turned a corner and was gone. I've spent years going back to this memory. It is so clear. And yet, what was she doing leaving such a very young child alone in the street? The first flakes were already falling. Time is a snow globe. You shake it and everything changes. A thin coat of white and the world disappears. This memory I have of the look on her face, it must be something I made up. The mind plays tricks, inventing what wasn't there. Of my father, I remember absolutely nothing. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.